start recording so we get everybody's name in there. That way, if I do make a mistake on attendance, I can always go back and look and make sure, double check, and if your name's in there, your name's in there. So make sure that you make sure your name is in the chat. But what I'm going to start with right now is, we'll do this, our entire screen so that you can see what's coming up. Okay. Also, if you haven't done the introduction discussion yet, please make sure you go ahead and do that. I'm pretty sure that y'all have, the two of you that are here. But they are asking for NATs quickly this semester. February 3rd is next Wednesday. So that's kind of going to counterbalance that. All right, so last time we kind of stopped after Henry VIII and his multiple wives, right? And I'll pull up a screen show here. There you go. Let me see. That doesn't look the way I want it to. No. Just a minute. My apologies. Why is it up there? Trying to do too many things at once, I think. I'm trying to show this one. Okay. All right, so do you guys see the slide with a bunch of pictures? What are y'all seeing?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so
I'm sorry, my Blackboard, I'm here, but my Blackboard, they messing up, so it's like it responds very late.
Okay. So this here, right, is Henry VIII. The issue, though, is that we don't have a whole lot of this is his most famous picture, and he is quite old at that point, right? He's in his 50s. For a lot of his life, he was not fat and very handsome. And again, these are his wives, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. Okay. Now, the reason we talked about this is because of the religious differences and how the Protestant Reformation made it to England through Henry VIII. So he's Catholic, and he's raised Catholic, and he actually secretly has a Catholic priest with him throughout his life, even though he makes the religion of England switch to Protestantism. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, but I just wanted to log in my attendance, but I'm at work today. I don't know, they scheduled me today, so I had to come in.
Okay. Are you going to be here for the class?
Yes, but I would just want to be able to speak.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay. So, sorry, that's not my train of thought. Catherine of Aragon is the Infanta of Spain, right? Her parents are Ferdinand and Isabella. They are major power. She's Catholic. They have a daughter. Mary's Catholic. The split comes here, okay, when they're breaking between, can you guys see that? Yeah, the split comes between this wife and this wife, right? And he becomes Protestant so that he can divorce this one and marry this one. And he remains Protestant for the rest of his life, for the rest of his reign. After he dies, though, the crown goes to this woman's son. She died in childbirth, but to Edward. But Edward is only 12, and he only lasts about 3 years. So then the next heir goes to Mary, which is this woman's daughter. Mary's Catholic. Mary lasts about 8 or 10 years. She's known as Bloody Mary because she is determined to bring England back to the quote-unquote true faith. And she is going to persecute Protestants and Protestant priests and anybody she doesn't feel is attending Mass regularly enough. So it's not a good look, right? And Mary dies within about 8 years of taking the throne. Then it's Anne Boleyn's daughter, Elizabeth, that, let me see here. There she is. This is one of her older pictures. She's old there. She's going to be Protestant. So what we have in England, which causes them to be kind of so far behind what's happening in the rest of the world as far as maritime exploration and making contact with other cultures, is that they're so busy trying to figure out what religion they want to be that they don't have time for much else. And when you switch back and forth, it's very expensive. And Henry VIII was not a spendthrift, right? He inherited a kingdom with a lot of wealth. His father, Henry VII, again, first of the Tudor dynasty, worked his entire life, spent very frugally his entire life to build up this treasury, right? This cash hoard, really. And Henry VIII inherits that. And Henry VIII is flamboyant, but maybe not in the modern sense, right? Obviously, he has 6 wives. He's very, very into ladies. But he likes fine clothing. He's a good dresser. He spends a lot of money on his wear, on his wife's gowns. And part of this was prestige. You had to present yourself as the king and queen. You had to show that you could afford the most expensive materials. And he spends a lot of that money. So by the time Elizabeth takes over, right, his second daughter, Elizabeth I, she doesn't have a lot of money. So she has to be pretty frugal and kind of cutthroat in the way that she runs things to keep everybody afloat. And in fact, during this time, you have restrictions on what clothes people of certain class can wear. And a lot of that is due to the growing bourgeoisie class, which is what they call it, which is a middle class or upper middle class that makes a lot of money either through trade or land ownership, etc., but they aren't nobility. In other words, they don't have a title. And in this time period, land is wealth, right? It's very hard to move up in the world if you don't have land. So with a title, nobilities have titles, right? If you're a noble family, you have a title. They usually earn this title, or their ancestors have earned it. They're given by the monarch at the time. So you could be the 7th Earl of Marlborough, right? Or York, Duke of York. So these dukedoms, these earldoms, these are all given to families that have served the monarch, okay, or people who have served the monarch, either in warfare, because it is, we're coming out of the Middle Ages here, or in other business ventures. But, up until the rise of the bourgeoisie, those were the only people really with money. So there was this huge gap, right? The income gap. You got king, nobility, everybody else. But then with the rise of that middle class through business, trade, entrepreneurship, the bourgeoisie gathers wealth, and they do buy some tracts of land that are available. And the more wealthy they get, they try to marry off their offspring into a noble family, right? To get those titles that you can't buy, in theory, right? So this is kind of the way the social life is going. So the bourgeoisie, as in gaining more income and gaining more money, can afford to buy these very lavish materials that could make their dress, their costume, their clothing that previously only royals and nobles could afford. So they actually come up with laws about who can wear what colors and what materials, because they're so bent on keeping the status quo and people knowing their place, right? So England is fraught with a lot of internal turmoil. And Elizabeth kind of puts that to rest, and she rules with an iron fist, right? It is all about her, and she refuses to get married because, as I'm sure you know, in that time period, especially, a woman has to always defer to her husband, and legally, once a woman gets married, she becomes the chattel of her husband or the property of her husband. So you get married and you have money. Your husband can then spend all that money on his mistress, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? So Elizabeth, royalty is no different. I mean, they have a few more leeways, but she refuses to get married because if she did, her husband would instantly become king and overrule her and take away her authority. So she says no, right? I will be known as the Virgin Queen. That does not go over well with her ministers. The fact that she's a woman, first of all, this is the first time you've had a powerful queen in England ever. At least what we would consider modern history of England. Now, there have been queens in other parts of the world that have ruled and have done very well, but this was the first time it happened in England. So let me, we'll get to that in a little bit. Okay. Under Elizabeth, you have a increased interest in exploration to the New World. And a lot of that has to do with the amount of income that the Spanish and Portuguese are bringing back to the continent from America. American silver guts the economy. Like it floods the economy. And when you have an influx of currency, it causes lots of ramifications worldwide, right? So Elizabeth, right, seeking wealth, seeking prestige, interested in what's going on in the New World, agrees to finance some exploration attempts. Now, she doesn't have the money to sponsor this. So what she does is she gives people letters of writ, and they are allowed to go and explore in the Queen's name. Now, she does give them a little bit of money, but the first time she does this, or one of the most famous times she does this, is Sir Walter Raleigh. He's one of her favorites. Now, she certifies him as a pirateer, right? You think, well, pirate, sort of. It's more like a legalized pirate, right? A crown-sponsored pirate. And he's actually supposed to go to the New World and investigate and see if they can start a settlement there, look for more gold and silver hoards. And he's allowed to have investors. So there are people that sponsor his exploration in addition to the Queen, in addition to the crown. And he, of course, travels to North America. And, she tells him secretly, well, if you come across any Spanish treasure ships, feel free to take liberties, but I want a cut. And if you ever say that I told you you could do this, I'll deny everything, right? But I'm not going to dissuade you from being a pirate, put it that way. So it's legal, ease there that's kind of vague understanding that he's going to go and do this. He goes to the New World, does find land, of course, and he lands in like the area of North and South Carolina, right, along that coast there. It's close to the Spanish colony of Florida. There's some Native Americans around, and he decides, okay, we're going to set up a settlement here. So he actually comes back. They get together a settlement of people that are willing to go. It's about 130 of them, and they sail over in 1587. He sets them up on a beach. They build a fort. He buries extra supplies, says, I'll be back in a year because, I've got to go home, get more supplies, see if more people want to come. They have plenty of supplies. They've started farming, all of this, right? He goes home, and in the meantime, Philip II of Spain, who was Elizabeth's former brother-in-law, he was married to her sister Mary, has continued to ask her to marry him. Right? So drama, because She thinks he's attractive, but she has no interest in marrying him. And he's Catholic, and he would be king, and he's already king of Spain. So no, right? So she turns him down respectfully at first, but eventually he gets angry, or he's insecure. I don't know. But he wants England, and he decides if she's not going to marry him, he's going to take it by force. So he makes plans and builds what we call the Spanish Armada. It's a fleet of hundreds of ships. He is cutting down forests throughout the Iberian Peninsula, which is where Spain and Portugal are, building ships in the Netherlands, because at this point the Netherlands belong to Spain. They're called the Low Countries. And they set sail for this island nation in 1588, and they arrive, right, because if we're looking on this map, this is the island of England, right? This is France down here. This is the English Channel running through their body of water. The lowlands or the Low Countries, the Netherlands are over here, right? So the Spanish Armada sails in, just massive amounts of ships appear on the horizon, and Elizabeth defends her country. I mean, she's forced to, but she dresses in armor, goes out, gives a rallying speech. The Navy is caught a bit off guard, but when she hears that the Spanish Armada is coming, she says everyone in port has to stay in port. So everybody's got to stay here and defend the homeland. So Sir Walter Raleigh doesn't make it back for 3 years. They do successfully defeat the Spanish Armada using fire ships. The weather helped out, right? They consider it acts of God. They hit a bad storm. They were forced to, some of the Spanish ships were forced to go around up through the North Sea, which is very treacherous. Some ended up shipwrecked in Scotland, some in Ireland. So lots of problems. And Spain is unsuccessful in trying to take over England, but it also means the American colonies are left to their own devices, really. And this is the colony that he set up, Roanoke. So when he does return in 3 years, he finds that there's nobody in the fort. But there doesn't appear to be a struggle. There doesn't appear to be a fight. There was no massacre. There was no fire. There was no deadly disease. There's not tons of bodies lying around, skeletons, or a huge graveyard. All the supplies are taken. They've been dug up and taken. And what's left carved into the front door of the fort, if you will, is the name Croatoan. So there's some agreement about that amongst historians because we can never know for sure. We can never know 100% what happened. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody saw him again. But Croatoan is the name of the Native American tribe that was around in that area, and many historians, including myself, that they assimilated into that Native American tribe. They joined them, probably due to starvation. Their farming was not successful. The soil there is sand. It's like a beach, so you know they probably ran out of food and sought shelter elsewhere. What backs this up is that Native American tribe in the next generation or so saw a lot more lighter skinned, blue and green eyed babies. Okay, so there's kind of that genetic evidence that we see there as well. So that's kind of what's going on there. In France, France sends over several, I'll go back to this one, explorations, Cabot, Cartier, right, explores the St. Lawrence River, and they start to make inroads into Canada. They also are not going to finance these new expeditions like the Spanish and Portuguese do. They send much smaller groups of people, and they're there to trade. So they actually make a lot of inroads in making trade exchanges with the Native American tribes that already live in what's now Canada along the St. Lawrence Riverway, and they're interested in furs, right? The French are all about fashion, and they've hunted most of these animals that they use for the furs to extinction in Europe already. So they begin trading in pelts, in fur pelts in Canada. So the French are doing it as well, but they're also doing it differently than the English or the Spanish, or the Portuguese for that matter. The Dutch are going to go through some serious independence movements and become their own country in the next 50 years. And then they will begin extending their reach to all over the world. The Dutch are amazing at shipbuilding. Right? That's where you go if you want to learn how to build a ship. And they establish these trading ports. The Dutch are interested in taxes. They're interested in controlling the avenues of trade, not necessarily creating this huge empire. The Spanish and Portuguese is all about empire. The English would like to be about empire, but they're still a little poor right now. And the French are, they're kind of a mix between empire and trade, right? It's whatever they can afford at the time. And they also have issues with the fighting families of the royalty. So why isn't this? This is kind of an unclear. But this is an example of the Columbian Exchange. So you had all of these products going to the New World and products coming back. And the Columbian Exchange really talks about the time before we see the Atlantic slave trade, right? Before we start seeing that become a major commodity, the enslavement and kidnapping of people. So over here, diseases came across to the New World and decimated Native American populations. I think that's something that we all know. But also coffee was smuggled to the New World. Coffee originally comes from Arabia, and they do not want to let that out, right? So biological warfare, smuggling over to South America, and as we know, it takes off, right? And South America is just apparently an amazing place to grow coffee and other plants that have properties we enjoy. So from the New World to the Old World, you see things like potatoes, right? We always think of potatoes from Ireland, but they originally came from the Old World. Corn, maize, tobacco, chocolate, right? Is it corn or some of the other things? Turkeys, peppers, squash, all these things come to the New World from the Old World. The other thing that you start to see introduced is sugar, right? And sugar was quite a commodity in the beginning because it was only grown in certain parts of the world and not often traded. But with the Portuguese entering into like that first sugar plantation in São Tomé and then expanding the slave trade for sugar plantations in the Caribbean, sugar becomes a more profitable commodity, and you start to see just the royals and the nobles can afford it. But then, it expands to as the century progresses and you have increased Atlantic slave trade, increased production of sugar, it becomes more widely available. And people during this time period didn't really understand the downfall to sugar, right? And sugar is in a lot of things. If you ever try to go off sugar, right? I don't eat sugar. It's in everything. Everything you want to eat, sugar in it. But Elizabeth I, in fact, had such a sweet tooth that she put sugar on everything, right? Even salads, meat, right? And she would brush her teeth with honey. So by the time she got into her 40s and 50s, her teeth were rotting because of how bad, right, she had treated them. And nobody knew that it was the sugar, right? If she had known, of course she would have stopped. She probably would have stopped brushing her teeth with honey. But that's how popular sugar became. And nobody really understood kind of what goes on after that. So how did, I think chapter 17, I just want to kind of run through this so that I can make sure I get to most of what we're talking about. We talked about the Reformation on Monday, the Counter-Reformation. All right, I'll show you this map that I have pulled up. Here we go, and I'll make it bigger so you can see it. No? Come on. Okay. You can kind of see it there. All right. So the Ottomans, which we'll get to, right, are here in green. In 1453, they take Constantinople, which is down here. It means they control all of the eastern half of the Roman Empire, plus, right? They have other stuff as well. But this is France, right? Spain, Portugal, England, Ireland, Scotland, right? And the Netherlands are here, but they don't earn their independence from Spain until the 16th century, shortly into the 16th century, which is the time period we're talking about now. But this whole area in the middle, right, are part of the Holy Roman Emperor. And hold on. It's kind of hard to explain. It's not holy and it's not Roman. It's not an empire. I don't know why they named it that. But if you look there, we're talking about Charles V, and this is Catherine of Aragon's nephew. All right. And so he inherits the kingdom of Spain through his mother. His mother is Joanna or Juana, and Juana, that her nickname is Juana the Mad, Juana la Loca. She has some mental health issues, but regardless, she and her husband are the king and queen of Spain, and then when she dies, it goes to her son Charles V. And so he inherits the kingdom of Spain, and then he is elected by the Pope and other Catholic dignitaries as the Holy Roman Emperor, which is somebody who's to control this central part of Europe here. And so therefore, so he inherits everything in orange, right? He gains these lands in addition to that, and everything inside those dark blue lines is part of the Holy Roman Empire, which he also becomes. So he is controlling these huge amounts of Europe, and also all of this in orange in the New World. He's Catholic, but he does not succeed in containing the Protestant Reformation, right? The Protestant Reformation blows up in Germany, right, in Central Europe, and begins to expand out from there. Let me see if I can get you another picture. Oh, dang it. So again, this is on MindTap. I'm just using it for images from the textbook, so we can get the. This one bigger. Okay, so you can see, right, Holy Roman Empire is in here, but it's not even all Catholic, because as 1555 rolls around, everything in that light orange color is Lutheran or Protestant. Scotland has become, it will become Presbyterian, but you also have Calvinism, Church of England, right? Roman Catholic and blue, so they are definitely still part of a power struggle in Europe. And then you have the Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, or Russian Orthodox, right? And then the Muslim Ottoman Empire. And within the Ottoman Empire, they do allow you to retain your faith. You usually have to pay a tax for that, okay? But they do allow you to retain that. And then chapter 16 also discusses the Enlightenment. So everything is being ruled by the church at this point, right? As far as they are where you go for answers to questions about what's happening. Okay, and the I don't like that it does that. Try again. The Ottoman Empire really makes it possible to really get access to the ancient Greek theories on astrology and other things, ways of life, etc. Where are we? Enlightenment. There we go. Oh, let me see the fish. Talked about them. So you start to see an interest in that, and really the church is kind of, you look to the scripture and you have these kind of mystic stories. It's a mystery, it's a miracle, or, you did something wrong, so this is punishment from God. That's kind of their answer to everything. Well, astronomers and other scientists really create this scientific revolution in which they say, if you're to find the cause of something, you must carry out a experiment, is what we would call it. Which you have to have, evidence that exists. So they develop this kind of scientific method, right? Which everybody knows, right? You have a hypothesis, then you prep your experiment, you do your experiment, you have a control group, you report your findings, and you conclude either your hypothesis was correct or incorrect or a combination of both, right? And so they set out to do this, and you start to see these writings spread throughout Europe, and they're analyzing, more of the famous ones are astronomy, right? Galileo, and others before him, Tahe, and I'm sorry, what's his name? Yeah. Rene Descartes, and other scientists, they get published that they don't really think the sun goes around the earth. They think the earth goes around the sun, right? But if the earth is not at the center of the universe, Tycho Brahe, then what does that mean in relationship to scripture? Okay, so Galileo actually builds a telescope, and they use these scientific methods to prove or disprove the Greek thoughts on astronomy, on science, on calculus, right? I think Newton was part of the scientific revolution, and you have several famous works come out of this. But it is, in the minds of the Pope and the Catholic Church, threatening their power, which you can see. If you don't have to depend on the church for your answers to everything, then they're not as powerful. Also, it contradicts what they thought and would go along with the scripture that they had. Now, Galileo was a staunch Catholic, and he didn't believe that this was in any way in opposition to scripture. That wasn't his point. He said they could coincide, but he pursued with his scientific writings, and he did publish some writings, and then he was picked up by the Inquisition, basically, or the Jesuit priests of the Inquisition, and questioned. And I say questioned, right? And then he recanted. So questioned is code for tortured. So he recants everything, signs a document to recant everything. But then upon his death says, no, I was right all along. I never wanted to recant. So he has a complicated relationship with the Catholic Church. And I think one of your documents that you're going to use next week, or that you could use next week, is his recantation, I believe, to the church. So they still controlled a lot of this. But so as the scientific revolution takes off and really carries over, like Boyle's law, right? Boyle was one of the scientific revolutionaries. it expands into politics. It expands into other parts of everyday life. And to be enlightened is what they're saying. The enlightenment is all about opening your mind to different ideas and different ways of thinking about something that may or may not have been true before. Now, they aren't, like I said, in complete opposition to the royals or to the church, but the reaction of the royals and the church to what's happening causes them to be that way. For example, you have a French thinker, the leading French thinker, François-Marie d'Arouet, better known by his pen name Voltaire, who declared that no opinion is worth burning your neighbor for. Right? And this is something that the world needs to remember. But he had to write a pen name because he had already been arrested once for writing things that the royals didn't like. And what comes out of this Enlightenment thinking, is that you have people like John Locke, Hobbes, right, who writes Leviathan, that take this open thinking to the idea of monarchy. And they believe that it's ridiculous to think that God said one family is above all others. And see, royals at the time are claiming divine right. In other words, they are chosen by God. And nobody really exemplifies this more than the French king, Louis XIV. Calls himself the Sun King because he says France rises and sets on him. And he does a lot of great things for France. He builds the palace at Versailles, which can house 10,000 people. Right? It's just massive. And he kind of exalts himself into almost godlike status, right? And that's what Henry VIII would have liked, and he got most of it. But England is already kind of divergent from that because they have the Magna Carta, they have the English Bill of Rights, or they will in the next 100 years. So they're already kind of going down that road of a joint partnership, like a constitutional monarchy. France is not, right? But John Locke, for example, says that government rules by the authority of the people. In other words, you have a sort of social contract, and this is called social contract theory. Social contract theory says that a government and people are in a social contract. The government's job is to provide security, financial security as far as a currency, a steady currency, and a way in which the people can exercise their right freely. The other side to that, the people's job of the contract, is to follow the laws that the government sets out, give up some of their freedoms in exchange for that security, support the government by fighting with the government against common foes. And so there's this kind of agreement here, right? That when you come into agreement between the government and the people. He also goes on to say, if either side fails to do their part, you have to revisit the agreement. Right? And of course, Locke is actually criticizing his monarch, the English monarch at the time, because he says that Henry VIII is not taking care of his people, right? These people usually have to write anonymously because it's pretty salacious what they're doing. But this kind of shows you the ideas at work here, that it goes from just being a scientific issue to, let's apply this to politics, to statecraft, and other issues within society. Now, as we talked about, women were chattel, basically, of their husbands or their fathers or their brothers. Okay. There would, in some cases, a woman could rule, but in most of the time, they were controlled by their husbands. Again, widows could independently control substantial properties and other assets. The main job for women was to get married and have babies. Right? That was it, and take care of the household. Now, as far as like going into the lower classes and the laboring classes and the peasants and stuff, we're moving away, at least in Europe, from serfdom. And the difference between serfdom and peasants is that serfs are agricultural labor that are legally tied to the land. Peasants are agricultural labor. They can go anywhere they want. Okay, so serfdom is kind of phasing out. That is a middle age restriction from the Middle Ages. Russia will keep serfdom until the 20th century. But most of Western Europe has already done away with serfdom. So you have this large kind of laboring peasant class. And for the most part, governments kind of look at them and churches kind of look at them as like, know your place and pay your tithes and do your labor, right? And the fact that the government will take care of you, will make good decisions that benefit the entire country because you're probably not intelligent enough to make them on your own. This is generally how they saw this. But as the time goes on and the Enlightenment, and they have to start paying more attention to these people because that's where the revolutionaries come from. They come from that lower middle class or the laboring class. And we talked about, Elizabeth, the Valois, and the Bourbons go back and forth, right? But this is how they're all related. The Tudors, right, and Elizabeth I. So how does she, who gets it next? It's her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, her son becomes James I of England. And he unites Scotland and England and Wales, and they become Great Britain under Charles I, the Stuarts. All right, but again, Philip II, King of Spain, is the son of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, and Charles V kind of abdicates the Kingdom of Spain to his son Philip II early on because he just can't run everything, right? So kind of gives that there. Let's see, political innovations. No, I think we talked about that. The English Civil War. Okay, so let's go back here. We have the Stuarts, right? So James I of England is also a king of Scotland. He's Protestant. Okay, he has Charles I, right? He has a son who's also Protestant, who's raised Protestant, and he takes over in 1625. Charles I has two children, Charles II and James II, and his wife, though, is Catholic, and she raises them Catholic. Now, that isn't necessarily a bad thing as far as Parliament's concerned. It's concerning, but the king is Protestant, and he's very aware that his son must be Protestant. Looks over. But Charles I is looking at King Louis XIV as this demigod in France, and he wants to be that. So one of the duties, even still until today, of the monarch is to open the session of Parliament. What happens is that then Parliament, they make laws and taxes, etc. He refuses to call them for 9 years. In his mind, he's thinking this will give him, hold on a second. go. Okay, let's move to this one. Come on. Oops, sorry. Go back. Do this. Oliver Cromwell, who's leading the military at the time, kind of takes over as a dictator. Parliament can't do anything without him, so they're floundering. He's in charge for 11 years. He's a staunch Puritan, and he puts down Puritanism in England, which is highly unpopular. They outlawed pubs and bars. They closed all the theaters, closed all the gambling houses. You were only allowed to wear certain colors. You could be put in jail for swearing in public. And they claimed that a lot of these Protestant and Catholic customs were superstition, right? And the final straw, I think, was when they canceled Christmas. The first off, they said, well, he wasn't actually born in the middle of December, which we do know that. But the fact that you have 12 days of feasting, right, is unacceptable. So he actually does Parliament a favor by getting sick and dying, because they don't know what they're going to do. And then Parliament formally asks Charles II to come back. Charles II, son of Charles I. I know we've got a lot of Charles and Jameses back and forth. He takes over. He has a wife. She's from Portugal. They're married for a very long time, but for whatever reason, she can't have children. He has something like 16 children, illegitimately, right? So that's how we know it wasn't him. But he never divorces her, to his credit, and never even pushes her aside. He continues to recognize her as his queen, and they have a pretty amicable relationship. But he has no legitimate male heirs. To him, he's got a brother, no problem, right? So in 1679, he passes something called the Habeas Corpus Act. Now, when he's asked to come back, he has to walk a very fine line. He knows that he could be killed, right? But by passing the Habeas Corpus Act, that means that royalty, the government, cannot just throw you in jail for no reason and not charge you. You have to be charged, okay? And that'll come up a lot later, especially in American politics. So he dies without a male heir, and we get his brother, James II. Now, that time period when Oliver Cromwell is ruling England, that's the Civil War. And real briefly, he is very Catholic. He never hides the fact that he's Catholic. He had married a Protestant because his brother wanted him to. She had 2 girls. She dies. He marries a Catholic because he wants to. The Catholic wife has a son. Now Parliament has a problem. He's only been in power 3 years. He very much favors Catholicism. His heir is Catholic. Parliament formally asks his daughter, Mary, who is married to William of Orange, to invade England, right? No less of family love there. And this is called the Glorious Revolution. He has to abdicate by a parliament and an invading Dutch army. So he is out. Religion is a problem, right? Especially during this time period in that area. All right, make sure your name's in the chat. I'll see you Monday. Make sure you do that introduction discussion on the discussion board on Blackboard. That'll keep you from getting NAT'd. If y'all have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great day.